Feeling foggy and unfocused at work? It's time to supercharge your brain with the right food choices and boost your productivity. Welcome to PhD with Woman on It, Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Dr. Joan Ifland. Topic: Feed your brain, boost your productivity. Episode 161 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle, and brain to that hustle, and good karma to really boost your productivity. Because empathy is my motto, and empathy is critical when you want to feed your brain and boost your productivity. Feed your brain, boost your productivity. What does it really mean? Join us for an eye-opening discussion with Dr. Joan Ifland, a pioneer in the field of food addiction and recovery. With over 20 years of groundbreaking work, Dr. Ifland is the lead author of the first scholarly description of processed food addiction. And this has been featured, this textbook, by the Oprah Winfrey Network, Martha Stewart Wedding Magazine, Fortune Magazine, and the US News and World Report. And now, finally, welcoming us with Positivity Hacks Delivered. In this episode, you will uncover the impact of processed foods on brain function and workplace productivity. Explore strategies for promoting healthier food options in your workplace. Learn how to reclaim control over cravings and make informed dietary choices. Now, whether you're an ambitious employee or a visionary leader, this episode will equip you with the knowledge to create a thriving, health-focused environment. This is a recording, so no questions asked during the live stream, and you will not be having inclusive conversation with us, but I'm sure if you reach out to us, we will be happy to help you however we can by connecting our hearts, our brains, having this human interaction. Now let's start with a simple question, Dr. Joan. Where in the world are you today joining us from?
Oh, I just last night drove from Seattle to Portland. I'm on the west coast of the U.S. And my daughter's here in Portland and my other daughter is in Seattle. So I'm often making that 3-hour drive between Portland and Seattle.
Oh, do you make it by train or how do you make it?
I tend to, I need a car when I get here, so I tend to just drive. I turn on a good book and I just make the drive. It goes by quickly.
Oh, absolutely. So how do you feed your brain while you were driving?
Well, I always take food with me. The U.S. food stream is just so corrupt now. Americans are eating most of their food in processed foods. So I just don't depend on being able to pull off the road and find food. I take, today I have with me a hamburger patty, and I have a sweet potato. I have carrots with me. I actually have watermelon with me. And all of these things I packed up in my travel bag before I left Seattle yesterday.
Oh, well, Dr. John, I hope when I make it to Portland or Seattle, I can make one of these trips and I can even bring my own food, because I think it's going to be really beautiful conversation today. Because I think, I would actually argue a little bit here. It's not really what we are sold. It's really the question of what we choose to buy, isn't it?
You have to, to eat real food in the US, and I understand it's increasingly the case in Europe, you need a skill set. And it's exactly what you're saying is when I go into a grocery store, I have the skill of being able to find the real food in that grocery store. Most of the time, it's going to be less than 1% of what's being sold. There's aisle after aisle of processed foods. But, I know a vegetable and I know proteins, oil, rice, beans, fruit. I can distinguish what's real from what's processed. But it's a skill set. Yeah.
It is a skill set, but also it does it really, is it really a skill set, or could we start reading and actually paying attention to what we are buying? Would it be a good solution?
So this is something that most people have forgotten. And I am ashamed to say that this came right out of the US. But in the mid 1980s, the tobacco industry moved into processed foods. R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods in 3 really short years. And they brought a cravings business model with them. So when I go into a grocery store now, and I think this is true increasingly around the world, the grocery store is very, very carefully engineered to create a flood of cravings in my head. It's the dopamine and serotonin and opioid and cannabinoid pathways in the brain. And there's signaling in that grocery store environment to make my brain flood with cravings. And that means that the blood supply is being pulled away from my frontal lobe, where I could make good decisions. But that part, the good decision part of my brain, is not getting blood flow. I have to have a skill set to get ready to go into the grocery store and neutralize cravings, neutralize and prevent that. It's a marketing tactic to prevent going through the store and falling for like labels. I don't read labels because I don't buy anything with a label on it. This is one of the ways they say, oh, stay in the grocery store, read the labels. No, because that keeps me under this bombardment of craving stimulation. What I need to do is I need to get in the grocery store, buy my fruits and vegetables, get my proteins, and on the way out, get the rice and beans and cold pressed oils, and get out of there as quickly as I can. My brain has been trained to react to these symbols to these signals with cravings. And once I'm in a deep craving state, I'm not making good decisions anymore. I'm not making decisions at all. My behavior is being run by those cravings.
Mm. Well, I think it really sounds complex because you talk about skill set, and it almost feels like you have to have a PhD to understand how to buy good food, not processed food. And I get it. Marketing is making us feel like we can't live without the newest car. We can't live without the newest iPhone, and so on and so forth. And we are bombarded by McDonald's. And you already made me, when you started talking about your food pack, you already made me mouth watering and thinking about this gorgeous food that is so nutritious. However, wouldn't it be better approach if we made a plan? And I'm just trying to think, because skill set equals to me PhD and a lot of effort and thinking deeply and planning and so on. But wouldn't it be good if we planned and thought about the process, thought about what is the brain really craving? Is it funky stuff, or is it the necessary food? And do I need to eat now, or can I actually plan ahead and make the plan for the day and so on? I know it still sounds a bit complex, but less complex than the skill set and your grant title and your tremendous work. I mean, tremendous work, because your textbook, as you mentioned, and also let me remind to our lovely viewers today, Dr. Ifland has written a processed food addiction textbook, and I encourage everyone to check it out, because this is how our brains work. They are addicted to junk food, and we need to stop in order to really live healthy, fulfilling life. So let's go back to the question. Can we plan ahead, and can we work with our brains rather than our brains urging us to buy stuff?
Okay, so I'll just make it really, really simple. When you're in the grocery store is engineered to create intense cravings that make you lose control and buy things that you don't want to buy. So Beata's idea of making a plan is another simple thing to do. When you have made a plan, you've actually planted a seed in your own brain, and it will carry you through. The skill is to get in and out of the grocery store as quickly as possible before cravings build up in your brain. And the thing that I really want people to know is that if you come out of the grocery store having bought something that you didn't intend to buy, that is not your fault. It's not because you lack willpower. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you don't want it. It's not because you're self-sabotaging. It's just because you stayed in the grocery store long enough for the cravings to build up in your head and take the decision making away from you and give it to the processed food industry.
And final question, and I'll stop because we want to move on to the next episode, because that's the main area. We want to talk about processed food in the workplace.
Yes.
So the final question is, can we make a plan before we are hungry? Wouldn't it be better to really engage our brains and really think holistically? Okay, one thing is cravings, but actually if I go to shop when I'm full, it's going to be better decision making.
Yes, I mean, Beata, you have absolutely the best ideas. Making a plan, preparing ahead. If you have your own food with you, you are much more likely to be able to avoid processed foods. We know that people tend to eat whatever is most available to them. So this is another great strategy. You're really on top of this. Have your own food with you, and then you won't be so hungry that you reach out for what's available. In the US, what's available is very likely to be processed foods. So this is smart. You're just saying a lot of smart things.
Oh, thank you. It's the street wisdom, not so much PhD wisdom, but this is something that I came to conclusion because my mother suffered from obesity. It was a stress-related obesity, and I realized I was going into similar problem. So now I'm trying to eat more consciously. I'm working on my brain, which is zooming very often. I mean, brain zoomies is a real thing. That's one thing that TikTok got it right. However, let's move on to the factor of big impact, how we do not have choices when it comes to company food and company cupboard. When we go to our offices, we are bombarded with more processed food. So, Dr. Joan, could you please explain to me why it is important to really change the thinking and strategizing of your company?
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great topic. We have online support groups that we've had for close to 7 years now, but we are moving into workplaces. In the US, a lot of workplaces have to pay for their employee health themselves out of their own pockets. We don't have national medicine, and it's just a lot of money. But in any workplace, productivity, absenteeism, we have something called presenteeism, where somebody is there, they're at their desk, but they're too brain fogged, tired, sick to actually be working. And in the IT field, you're using your brain. That's what you've got. And when we talk about careers, anybody who eats real food, clean food, unprocessed foods, your brain is going to be working so much better than everybody around you that you will really stand out and you will be able to progress. And if you're in the other side Like you just feel like you don't have the confidence, your productivity or your mental clarity is not good enough. You're not applying for promotions because you have low self-esteem because you can't control your food. Well, you can flip that just by getting on real food. Now, in the U.S., and I'm sorry to keep referring to the U.S. because I know you're worldwide, the food processors have gotten into the employers and they've said, "Oh, it'd be such a nice thing to have treats and snacks for your employees in the break room. So buy these lovely packaged things." And of course, it's ruining employees' productivity because they're numbing. These substances are numbing. They're inflammatory, which means the brain is inflamed, which means it's that we experience that as brain fog. And when you're using your brain in your job, you have an IT job, and it's inflamed. That is really it's painful. People just don't know that processed foods do that. And so when you get off of them, it's really within 4 days, your brain clears, you're thinking more clearly, you don't have the brain fog, you don't have the fatigue. And also lots of other great things are happening. The bloating is going away. And I know for me, my allergies got better, sinus infection cleared up, my mood improved. I was kind of stably happy. It's pretty remarkable what happens when people get off of processed foods. And most people just don't know how quickly it can happen, literally 4 to 10 days. So there's a lot of hope here. You may be an IT person and you may be thinking, well, I'm at the limit of what I can do. But if you take those processed foods out, you'll find that your capabilities and your determination and your confidence just really flourish. It's worth trying. It's a good experiment. But yes, the workplaces that stock processed foods in the break room, they have no idea how much they're damaging their company.
They are damaging slowly their workers by buying processed food. So let's take it a step back. What does it mean, processed food? How do we distinct processed from non-processed food?
Okay, this is a great question. There are 7 major categories of processed foods. And it's interesting to know this because each category affects a different craving pathway in the brain. So sugar and caffeine affect dopamine. It's just like alcohol. And excessive salt, gluten, and dairy all affect the same pathway as morphine. And then you have excessive fats. We have to eat salt. It's one of our key electrolytes. We have to eat fat. Our brain is encased in fat. Every cell's membrane is made from fat. We have to eat it. But when you eat too much of it, it starts activating the same pathway as marijuana. So those 7 categories are refined carbohydrates, like sugar. Any kind of sweetener will activate that dopamine pathway and give you cravings. And then you have flour, you have gluten, you have salt, excessive salt, dairy, excessive fat, caffeine, and then food additives. Because when the tobacco industry got a hold of the processed food industry, it's part of their business model to hide craving substances in the product. Like they hid extra nicotine and pyrosine in cigarettes. Cigarettes are a worthless product, except that you can create cravings for them. And all that your sugar is a worthless product. Sweeteners are worthless. They're destructive, but they create cravings. So when you think about that business model, when tobacco came into processed foods, there was this huge increase in the amount of high fructose corn syrup, salt, and fat hidden in products. And there was a particular consultant, Howard Moskowitz, who went around to all the corporations and maxed out, just absolutely got to the top of the amount of sugar, fat, salt that could be hidden in a processed food before the consumer would reject it. And that's what happened. Our food supply was corrupted. So they applied the rest of the addiction business model. The addiction business model has 5 A's. And one is hiding addictive substances in the product. The next one is advertising. So just like they tried to make cigarettes sexy, they've tried to make processed foods healthy. They're not healthy. You have to make them very cheap. And here in the US, we're still under the burden of high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup has been banned in other countries, but it made processed foods cheap enough that the tobacco industry could come in and work its cravings business model. And then you have lots and lots of advertising, you have availability. So when they were taking out the cigarette vending machines, they were putting in vending machines for sodas and snacks. And then the last A of the cravings business model is young age of onset. And just as the cigarette companies tried to get young boys to smoke with the Joe Camel campaign, then they went ahead and they did. They took the Marlboro Country Store marketing process, which is a cravings establishment process where you get a free sample and you develop the dependency in the brain on nicotine. And now you have packs with coupons on them. And when you send in the coupons, you're getting free, like a belt buckle or a hat. But that belt buckle or the cigarette lighter has got the Marlboro logo on it. And it now has become a trigger or a signal to use. It's like triggering, it's turning on those craving pathways. So they took that very same business model and they applied it to young children. They created the Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse. And so they would get the kids to buy Kool-Aid. There would be coupons on the Kool-Aid packages. The kids would send in those coupons and then they would get a hat or a cassette player or a watch with the Kool-Aid logo on it. Now they're addicted to sugar. They have cravings for sugar. This is just so awful to think about, that as children, that these merchants targeted children. And so children are supposed to be thinking about their own stuff. They're supposed to be having fun. But instead, their brains are now being dominated by cravings for sugar, thanks to the Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse business model. And this is it's just unthinkable. It's just horrible. They've taken the Kool-Aid Wacky Warehouse, I think, off the market. But now you have very young children who are craving all the time. And it is one of the things, it's much harder to reverse a cravings disorder. I call it a cravings disorder if it starts very young. So these poor children, I mean, they're 1 year old or less. I have seen a photograph of baby bottles with soda, sugary soda logos on them. And this is just, it's merciless. It's ruthless what the processed food industry has done to children. So now it started at a very young age, and that's going to be a much more difficult cravings to make go away. The reason why this is so hard, and I really want to go into it with you, is because I don't want you to blame yourself. This is not your fault. This is a vicious, tragically effective business model that was certainly applied to me even in the 1950s. Today is actually my birthday. I'm turning 73 today, but I was addicted probably in utero. My mother was sugar addicted, and I'm sure I was born with cravings. So that is a big reason why you can't stop craving. And if you can't stop craving, you can't start controlling your behavior. So a lot of people hate themselves at this point. They've tried to give up the processed foods. The cravings just kill them. The cravings are stronger. You have this big, huge midbrain with lots and lots of cravings in it. It's much, much bigger than the frontal lobe. You might have had this experience where you were not wanting to eat something. Your brain is screaming, no, 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 no. But you're still walking. I call it the zombie walk. You're still walking to get whatever it is that you don't want to eat. Well, that's because the cravings have dominated your brain. And it's very easy to get the midbrain. The midbrain is much, much bigger than the frontal lobe. And that's what these companies have done, is they've figured out a way to stimulate the cravings in the midbrain. So the cool thing is that if you can get off the processed foods, if you need help, reach out to Beata and she'll reach out to me. That is what we do. We provide support for people to get over the cravings. But I remember January 4th, 1996. We're coming up on 25 years ago. 29 years ago. I got off of sugars and flours just to lose weight. I was a dieter and I thought, oh, this is the next diet. And I was shocked. 4 days later, the cravings stopped. I had cravings my whole life. I can remember going to kindergarten, probably at age 4, and having cravings, not being able to go out to the kitchen and get something. It just drove me crazy. And I was 4 years old. But on January 4th, 1996, the cravings stopped. I didn't even know that was possible. And the food industry is trying to tell us it's normal to have cravings. It's not normal. It's a sign that your craving pathways, your pleasure pathways, are overexcited. It can stop within 4 days. And here's the thing to remember. The cravings can get worse during those 4 days. They can get increasing. I mean, I've stood in my living room and on that third day when the cravings are just dancing around in my head, and I'll just yell at them. It's like, stop. I'm not going to give in to you because I know I'm going to be standing here again in 3 days. So if you know that they're going to get better, hang in there. Don't let them dominate you. And so what is the answer? What is the answer to all of this? I know in the United States, because I have a business background, I have an MBA from Stanford, and my undergraduate degree is in economics and political science, and I worked in government for a couple of years, and I've also worked in a big corporation. So the answer is not going to come from government. These industries are huge. It's not just the processed food industry. In the US, we are so sick. We eat most of our food in processed foods, and most Americans, 93% of Americans, have some kind of diet-related diagnosis. So now you have the medical industry making money hand over fist from all these chronic illnesses, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, liver disease, irritable bowel and kidney disease, and depression and anxiety. And it just goes on and on. If the industry in the U.S., the medical industry in the U.S. is $4.5 trillion, and 90% of that comes from these chronic illnesses. So in my opinion, we're going to flip this. We can do the most good in a workplace. I have 7 years of experience working with individuals in an online recovery community. But oh my goodness, if you just imagine that you were working in a workplace where real food was available, nobody around you was eating processed foods. You didn't have that urge to fit in by eating processed foods with everybody else. Your urge to fit in would be to fit in with everybody eating real food. Just think how easy this would be to do. So being totally transparent here, we're right in the middle of our first negotiation with a workplace. And I am so excited about it because this makes it easier. Now, when this spreads through workplaces, then and the managers and the executives see that their employees are happier, they're more productive, they're more engaged, they're more creative. Oh my gosh, they're just going to run to get the processed foods out of the workplace and get real food to you. So this is not going to happen from government, because the government is dependent on these industries. I think in the United States, between processed foods and the medical industry, that's probably about 25% of our entire economy. It's very hard to realize how big this has become. So, in the US, politicians depend on campaign contributions. If we ever flip this, if it ever becomes more normal to eat food and processed foods, it's going to come from workplaces. And the skills that it takes to live differently than the rest of the country, the rest of your culture, where most people are eating most of the processed foods most of the time, is going to be just part of the work environment.
Oh, thank you, Dr. John. I'm so sorry. I missed a little bit of the show because clearly we mentioned big company names and they are lobbying to get me off the screen. However, there are more questions that we can ask. Hopefully, we can continue our really fascinating conversation. I'm desperate to ask you more questions. I hope I didn't miss a lot because I want to watch that part. Good, excellent. Now, I ask you about the processed food. Now, I'm gonna be a little bit selfish because my bestie is talking about her diet, which is keto diet, and she's like, I'm such a great fan of it and so on. But all of a sudden yesterday she told me that she ate something, it seems to be keto and all natural products and so on, and she said she needs to read the label to really see what could cause her stomach pain and a little bit of uneasy feeling. So let's talk about different diets. Do you recommend some or any, and talk about that?
No, I mean, this is such an excellent question. Processed foods is processed foods. And putting that keto label on a processed food, it's part of the deception. So cigarettes are sexy and keto foods are healthy. No, 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 they're not. It's hugely deceptive. Whatever food plan works for you, the key is to take the processed foods out. If it's in a package, don't buy it. If it's a vegetable and it's over in the produce section, that's real food. If it's in a package, it's not real food anymore. It's processed foods. And there's almost nothing. I mean, you can buy a can of, like I had a can of split pea soup the other day. One ingredient, split peas. That's okay. But in general, if there's more than a couple of ingredients on the label, it's not food anymore. Your brain isn't going to think it's food. Your brain is going to think it's a drug. So it's very simple. I mean, a meal, whether it's keto, where you have a protein, typically an animal protein and a vegetable on your plate, or whether it's carnivore, where you only have an animal protein on your plate, or whether it's plant-based, where you have beans and vegetables on your plate, or paleo or Mediterranean. I have studies for all of those food plans showing that they work to improve health. But what is the one thing that they all have in common is they've all eliminated the processed foods. And they're well-balanced protein to carb to fat. And that's the key. Other than that, it doesn't make any difference what food plan you're on. I don't eat anybody else's food plan. I have a method I use to determine which real foods work best for me. So some days it looks like plant-based and some days it looks like keto. And yesterday I was in a big hurry, so I only had a hamburger for lunch, and that would have been a carnivore meal. So I eat foods that I have made, or I know what to order in restaurants. Typically, I would order a hamburger without the bun and a salad, and that's my typical restaurant meal. But yeah, it's the processed foods. It's not the food plan.
But if you order a burger, do you ask the server whether a burger is just meat, or do they buy their burgers, or how do they process it?
Yes, I will. I call it vetting. Before I go to the restaurant, I will get on their website.
In some that good food.
Yeah, I will get on their website before I go, and I will not go to a restaurant that what I'm looking for is either organic or I'm looking for a good quality. They're saying that their beef is Wagyu beef, or that their beef is local, or no antibiotics, or I will look on their website. And if I don't see that it's a quality meat, I won't go. I'm not going to wait until I get there. There are very few restaurants I will go to, but I've looked, and I've looked at where they're sourcing their beef. Yeah, humane treatment of animals is a huge issue. And if I can tell if I have consumed an animal product where the animal was badly treated, I'll have a nightmare about it. I'll have really heightened anxiety, and I know it's coming from an animal that was not humanely treated. So how you choose, even among real food in the U.S., it's a big issue. But I do want.
Sorry to interrupt. I just thought you finished because I had a silence, but clearly it's my network here coming into factor. Hopefully it's not Kraft Food or any other producer. However, that's really the key here. You touch a really interesting point, which is honesty of the restaurant and how do they source their meat. Mm-hmm. And that really shows you, because those cooks who go to the market and pick their produce by hand are those that you can trust. Mm-hmm. And if you can't trust, you're better off going and cooking yourself. Is mm-hmm. that the biggest, PhD of today?
Yeah, and I do want people to know that we have really quick cooking methods. I don't know if this is available in the rest of the world, but there's a new appliance called an Instant Pot, and it can make cooking very, very quick. You can fill, I think almost everybody has a slow cooker, what we call slow cookers, but you can fill a slow cooker in 5 minutes. You open a package of chicken and you put in a cup of beans if you're eating a starch, or a cup of rice, and you just put that lid on, and when you come back, you have a fantastic meal. If you put your slow cooker together before you go to work, then you've got a fantastic meal waiting for you at home, and that will get you home. I mean, you'll be able to say, no, I'm not going to stop. I'm going straight home. I have food at home. And then you put your lunch into your thermos, and when you're ready to go to work in the morning, you just grab that thermos. It's got to be quick. You've got to develop really quick meal prep skills, if you will. I have to, because I work. I love my work. I work a lot. And I have 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there to go out to the kitchen and get a meal. So it's got to be about 5 minutes.
I can see my husband jumping up, pick me, because, ever since we bought this slow cooker in a big corporate, I'm not going to mention, but we love going there because they've got an amazing deal. And we bought a small slow cooker. And, we used to just think, oh, it's a nice thing to have, but really, what can I do? I can put produce until I made first bread, and I never want to buy American bread again.
But we don't eat bread. So so this is another kind of seductive thing, which is some people say, oh, if you make it at home, it's okay. No. And if you make meth at home, it's still meth. So bread is made from flour. In the early 1900s, they got the big steel rollers into the flour mills, and they powdered it to the extent that now that it gets into your bloodstream really quick, you get a glucose high, you get a dopamine high. So it's now, it's become a craving food.
Oh my goodness. So I have to find another way. So what about if I just take some grains and add millet to it, and I make a bread that is more keto?
Well, what you would do is, so that's going to create a craving by association. Your brain gets the idea, oh, we can eat bread. And then that craving part of the brain will just reach over it'll get you to then say, oh, well, all bread, I eat bread, bread's okay. It'll create cravings. So the thing to do is just have the millet, just make the millet and have a lovely millet isn't one of the superfoods. And you have just a serving of millet on your plate along with your protein, and whether it's a plant protein or an animal protein, and a lot of fiber in your vegetables. But just make the millet. Millet's delicious.
There you go, millet's delicious. I'm feeding it my husband, and definitely we are going that way. I'm not quite sure whether I'll be able to change his cravings for bread and Irish bread and potatoes, because that's definitely another one on our list that we like.
Yeah.
Cut still, but again the question is, because we talk about the zooming brain, and this is something that I heard for the first time from my husband. He told me that he can discern which food could be the beneficiary of his bad stomach the next day. So he just goes through what he ate the previous night, and then his stomach is turning upside down, and he knows, aha, that was that seafood.
Yes, this is really great intuition on his part. And I do recommend using intuition. You've got to distinguish the voice of your intuition from the voice of your cravings. But a lot of times people can get started on this if they really believe that they can take it at their own pace. It's one of the things that we really emphasize in our programs. The slower you go, the further you get. Slow and steady wins the race. We have all the time in the world. And then you put your hands on your heart and you say, am I ready to give up bread? And if the answer is not really, well, then honor that. And when you put your hand on your heart and you realize, oh my gosh, the bread is making it impossible for me to think. Or when I eat bread, I get really depressed. Or when I get bread, I just can hardly hold my eyes open. Now your intuition, because it's connected, cause and effect, now your intuition will say, I think we're ready to give up the bread. So you just go inside yourself. Don't ever let anybody else tell you, oh, it's time to give up the bread. No, it might not be. And it might be so stressful from giving up the bread before you're ready to, or anything else. It might be so stressful to give that up before you're ready. The stress will give you cravings. And giving up something too soon could lead to you actually binging on it. So you've got to really respect that intuition. Yes, we're ready to give that up, or no, we're not. So this is something that is very disturbing to me in the eating disorder treatment community, where they're making their binge eating patients eat processed foods, but the processed foods are causing the cravings, which is causing the binging. It's a problem.
Like never-ending figure of eight. Now, good, but isn't it partly related to slow life and thinking and mindfulness?
Well, I mean, just one step at a time. One step at a time. People will find, for example, as they come off the processed foods, that it's easier for them to sleep through the night because their glucose isn't crashing. People are using caffeine to try to counter the grogginess of the processed foods. So when you get off the processed foods, you might be able to start tapering off the caffeine. Then your mood is better, your sleep is better. So the things build on each other. It's you do one good thing for yourself, and that makes you stable enough and strong enough and clear enough to do the next good thing for yourself. So that you're building a new lifestyle, but you're building it on the capabilities as they come along. In other words, you're not setting yourself up for things that you're not capable of doing yet. It's very important that expectations stay in line. that you don't expect. Oh, and one of the worst things on the planet is a quick weight loss, because the faster you lose the weight, the faster it's going to come back on. If you lose weight too quickly, you will wake up another part of the brain called the fear of famine brain. Chronic dieting. A lot of people now have their binging is actually based on the belief in their primitive survival brain that there's not enough food, because for years or repeatedly they've restricted calories or they're fasting. And that wakes up the fear of famine brain. How do you know that your fear of famine brain has taken over your behavior? It's binging. Binging is
It
a
is.
survival mechanism in times of famine.
Oh, absolutely. And I experienced it last year when I was depressed. I had a lot of problems. Eventually, I had to go therapy, but really,
Depression is also very connected to processed foods. What happens as those cravings are stimulated over and over again, those pathways literally wear out. It's a process called downregulation. But the craving pathways are also your feel good, your pleasure pathways. And as these just monstrous business practices go on year after year after year, and they're stimulating those pleasure pathways to create cravings. Remember, it's a cravings business model. These are terrible products. There's no way you could sell them if they didn't create cravings. Cravings are the reason why people buy them. So over time, those lovely pathways that are supposed to be there to create pleasure for you, they wear out and you get depression.
are right. So, we talked about my depression, and really, it was also for me a time to reflect and, and but it's not the case for now. However, mindfulness and really conscious eating, conscious living is how I cut my depression. I cut the drugs then by the concept of, oh, I'll just take this pill and my dopamine serotonin will be back and I will be happier again.
Processed foods are really hard on the brain. It's not just the cravings, but just remember that when you're having a craving, the frontal lobe is not getting blood supply. And so your attention span, your learning, your memory, your decision making, your problem solving, your impulse control, those are all in the frontal lobe. And we, in the US, we have epidemics of loss of ability. It's called cognitive impairment, is the technical name for it. But I want people to know that if you get off the processed foods, those things can get better. It's one of the cool things about getting off of processed foods is your hard wiring, your original factory blueprint is still there. And so maybe you've been told that something is incurable, or that you need surgery for it, or that you need to be medicated for the rest of your life. Try it. Try getting off the processed foods. And if you find that the cravings make it too difficult to get off them, reach out and we will give you help with that. You could use support.
Is that a group that can be easily found
Yes, go to Food
on
Addiction
that?
Reset, and we will help you. We are worldwide. We broadcast 24 hours. We broadcast around the clock. We have teams around the world. The tobacco industry got to the rest of the world very quickly with these processed foods. And so this is now the obesity, diabetes, depression, heart disease. It's now a worldwide problem. But we have teams around the world. So no matter where you are in the world, you can get help. You don't have to try to find a local person who gets
Oh,
this.
Dr. John, thank you so much for this amazing episode because it's so information rich and also great food for the brain.
Yes.
And I hope everybody is satisfied with our discussion. I'm sorry if I talked about myself too much, but I've
Oh
been
no.
there. I'm craving. Luckily, I'm not working in an office environment, but I still crave for a bar of Snickers sometimes.
Yes, yes. It's really it's I don't want people to think that they have failed in some way if you try this and you can't make it work. That is not your fault. What you're learning in that process is how deep your cravings have been embedded in your brain. And we have methods, just little exercises to do that will help you rewire your brain. But it's like learning a language. You use flashcards. If you've ever learned a foreign language, you just train your brain to associate new words with common objects and so on. So that's all we're doing as we rewire the brain not to crave.
Rewire the brain not to crave. People often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. And we recommend it daily to not eat processed food. Slow food
Yes.
is the way to go and to feed your brain. So, well, as we wrap up our discussion with Dr. John, I would like to go to our usual question because, we don't like processed food, but we like processed questions that we take over and over, but they are beautiful, beautiful summary of our discussion and also give an insight to our amazing guests. So, what is the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I read before I started my career, Dr. Joan?
I was listening to this book. I had a long drive yesterday, and I listened to a book called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. And it's a method for resolving childhood trauma. And I realized that my childhood trauma prevented me from having the career, a big, big corporate career, because I was too limited by my childhood beliefs. This is a brilliant method. There are workbooks for the no bad parts, and those no, it's just things happen to us. This is also key for controlling your eating, because if as a child you ate to comfort yourself, which I did, then that idea is still operating in your body. And the no bad parts, it allows you to get in touch with that part and heal that part so that it's not driving your behavior anymore.
So, is it also a message to mothers to really think about what we are feeding our children? Because they, even if we just sneak past them and chocolate bar, that may be detrimental for their future
Just
behavior.
yes, and if your child is acting out, just like what you just said about your husband, oh, if he has a stomach ache, he can tie it back to what he ate the day before. If your child is acting out, if they're angry, if they're aggressive, if they're depressed, if they're lethargic, just ask yourself, well, what processed food did I feed them? Or did they go to somebody else's house and get processed foods? Almost, and this is going to sound over the top, but always, if your child is acting out, ask yourself, oh, did they get some processed food somewhere?
Mm. And also, I hope you can hear it. I'm sorry, it's important because we don't realize that just one bar and just one piece of bread, but it's a lot of sugar and this ADD with pills, and it's a vicious cycle that
Yes,
is not good for the brain.
yes. It's a high followed by a crash. And in the crash, you use again because you feel so bad. And then you're high again. And then you're crashing again. And you're eating something numbing. So sugar and flour and dairy and excessive salt and excessive fat, they're numbing. And you think you're reaching for them maybe because you have poor control, poor impulse control, but they're actually causing the poor impulse control. It's a really vicious, tight cycle, and it's not your fault.
Mm. Dr. Joe, absolutely, it's not your fault, but think about what you we go back to our usual questions, let's imagine that you could meet anyone in the world for a private
I would meet.
and where would you go to?
That's a better question. So I would want to meet with the head of a particular foundation here in the US. It's called the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They were very instrumental in the 1980s in getting good education about tobacco into the hands of actually local officials. So they were very instrumental in getting those smoking zones started. And they are now interested in processed foods, but I don't think they have the cravings angle. I don't think they really realize that this is it's a cravings business model. And so I would like to have breakfast with the head of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and explain this to them. And we would go to a restaurant where in the US, we have a category of restaurants called farm to table restaurants. And we would go to a restaurant that sources their ingredients directly from farms.
That's really amazing. Again, a reminder to read the labels, also soul, because if you don't feed your body properly, that there is one TikTok wisdom that is your brain is connected to your speed, your stomach to actually.
There are lots of microorganisms in the gut to break down processed foods, but they're toxic themselves, and they release neurotransmitters that actually travel to the brain from the stomach. It's another source of depression, anxiety, anger. If you have a partner who seems to be angry a lot of the time, try getting them off the processed foods. It's just devastating. And processed foods attack cell function in 8 ways. And this is why so many different things can get better. But it's why the process of recovery is so much fun. It's because you see, my mood is better, and my skin is better, and my hair is better, and my stomach doesn't hurt anymore, and my joints don't hurt anymore, because processed foods attack the whole body.
It does, and that's from your insights and experience, and so much wisdom. As I mentioned, there are resources that you acknowledge yourself. Don't read the big letters saying it's a option as well. Your work, Dr. Joan, is not only for television landscape conversation, how processed food is destroying our gut.
If people were going to take one thought away from this conversation, it would be, this is not my fault. I have a much more deeply embedded cravings disorder than I thought or I realized. I might need more in-depth help. And this is not my fault. I'm not weak. I just need to get into a comprehensive program. And the other thought I would really like for people to leave with is this idea that processed foods are injuring you at a cellular level, cells. So when cells aren't working, systems aren't working. When systems aren't working, then you go and you get a diagnosis. But it's all the same underlying malfunction, which is that your cells are being compromised by processed foods. So those are my closing thoughts.
That's a big heart from me. One question though, cells, what about DNA? Is there any data? Is it stored in DNA somehow?
So processed foods actually turn on genes, so they can turn on the cancer gene. You have your DNA, right? But your environment turns the harmful genes on. And so if you get off the processed foods, then those genes turn off. Like dairy, for example, we do have evidence that dairy turns on a cancer gene. It turns on the weight gain gene. because of course you think about what's dairy for. It's to take a 100-pound calf and turn it into a 600-pound cow in 1 year. So dairy turns on the weight gain gene, and it turns on acne. It turns on the diabetes. It turns on the acne gene. You can control what genes on your DNA are turned on and off.
Thank you, Dr. Joan, for giving this key takeaway from today's discussion. Look for something positive in each day, even if some days you have to something to eat, positive to eat in each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change, and my final word, change your food eating habit. Thank you.
Hey.